live and then, okay, we're live. So this, I will say that this is not an official committee meeting because we're not in session now. So we really don't have official committee meetings, but I think of it more as a think group because we really need to do something quickly here. And so we wanted everybody involved. So Sarah and I will kind of be moderating the meeting here. And I am going to say that, just make a point here that if we really trusted our town officials, we wouldn't have to be doing this at all. We could just allow them to make decisions without the legislature always having to micromanage every little thing that they do. So I just wanted to get that out there and get it off my chest. It's a bugaboo of mine. And if you haven't, I don't know if John McClowry is with us here, but if you haven't yet, you can read the book Vermont Papers by John McClowry and Frank Bryan, and you'll see where I'm coming from. So there are a number of people with us today, committee members, VLCT, town clerks, select board members, Secretary of State's office. So what I'm going to do is we need to be pretty efficient with our time here. So as I told Sarah, I'm going to kind of run this meeting with more of an iron hand than usual, just because I think we need to get some things done and we need to come to some resolutions and we can't be futzing around. So the goal of what we're doing here is to get a bill started, to come to some resolution today so that we can have a bill drafted. Tucker and Betsy Ann have drafted the beginnings of a bill for us. And the goal is the House will take up the bill the first week, because as I understand it from Sarah, you probably will have your committees appointed probably even the first day. We can't have our committees appointed because we have to elect first the third member of the Committee on Committees and the pro tem. So we won't have our committees until probably the end of that week. So the goal is that the bill will start in the House. The House will hopefully just pass it over very quickly, that we can come to some resolutions today about what needs to be in this bill and where we're going. And then we can start working with our colleagues to convince them to support it and get it to back to the Senate by, and we hope that you can suspend rules to do this, because this is something that's very timely, and get it over to us at the beginning of the second week. We'll take it up and do the same thing and hopefully have it to the governor's desk by the 16th or that following Tuesday. So that's, there's probably never been a bill that's passed had such a short time frame, but I think that is what we have to do. Does anybody have any questions about that? And Sarah, if I can't see everybody on my screen, so if you can help watch for people, if anybody has a question or a comment on that. Rob?
So is this going to be the only opportunity that people are going to have to really weigh in on this topic?
Well, no, you'll have committee meeting.
I'm sorry, may I call you back? I'm in the middle of the meeting.
Senator Clarkson, you are not on mute and we can hear your telephone conversation.
Sorry, I thought I was.
No. So Sarah, do you want to weigh in on that?
I would love to, Rob. This is really just intended to be a brainstorming session so that we can take a look at all aspects of what we need to do to give assurances on town meeting day, in the hopes that we can signal what our what our bill will look like in January, but we are absolutely going to take testimony when we get back into committee. As soon as I get official word, I will make up an agenda for the very first week of session so that we can have as many perspectives coming in front of the committee
Okay, that's fine. I just
as
wanted to,
possible.
okay, so there'll still be
So-
an opportunity for other people to weigh in, not just.
Oh,
today.
yeah. Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
So but I think my goal here is to not load up this bill with anything except what absolutely has to happen in order to allow town meeting to go forward. Because if we start putting anything else on it at all, it's not gonna fly. We're gonna have too much controversy. So if we can get this group to agree on what might be in there, then, and maybe we have to have another meeting of this group, like around the week of the 14th or something, if we can't finish it up today. So, but I would say that as much as possible. So I'm going to, given that there have been a couple meetings that have taken place before this by a smaller group, the Secretary of State's office, Sarah and myself. John, I think you were there, the league. And I think that, and so what I'm going to do here in the, in order to save time maybe, is I'm going to say what I think that there have been some general agreement on 3 issues. And that they are allow the towns to change the date of town meeting, allow them to send out ballots to all their voters, and then some flexibility around the Secretary of State to make some operational management decisions with the town clerks. So those are 3 ideas, and Tucker and Betsy Ann have put them into a draft bill so far. Does everybody have access to that? Can we make sure that, okay, good. All right. So what I'm going to do here is, the way I often do it in my committee is go through each of those 3 things and ask if there's any issues around them, or if there's general agreement that they should be in the bill and that that's a direction to go. If so, then just check them off. That's as we go through them. So let's take the first one. The ability for towns to change the date of their town meeting. Okay, anybody have comments or suggestions, or Senator Colmore?
Senator,
Thank you,
oh,
Madam
sorry.
Chair. So I apologize if I'm coming in on this late. I didn't realize there had been anything prior to now. And I don't know whether I can support changing the date at this moment. I'd certainly be willing to listen to others talk about how that might work, but I can't say that I would jump immediately on board.
So let me just be clear. This isn't changing the date. This is allowing a town to change the date if they choose to. It wouldn't be changing the date. Dummerston, for example, has already decided that what they would like to be able to do is change the date of their town meeting to May, when they can be outside. They can't do that without our permission. So this isn't changing it for towns. It's allowing them the right to make that decision. Does that clarify it for you at all?
Somewhat. How would a town decide to do it or not do it in terms of a vote?
Oh, the legislative body would just do it.
Okay. Thank you.
So we've got a couple of blue hands, Jim Harrison and then Scott
Okay.
Woodward.
Okay. Jim?
Yeah, thanks, Jeanette. I don't have any problem with enabling towns to change the date. But given the very tight time frame to make some changes, especially if a town wanted to mail ballots, is there any thought to just maybe pushing all town meeting dates back a month or so? And still given the flexibility, is there any advantage to doing that? I'm not opposed to what's there. I'm just saying, was that considered, should it be considered of just pushing all the dates back a month?
Well, I can respond to that. I think that we don't know. That would be April. We don't know what the situation will be in April. And some towns may want to have their town meeting in March and mail out ballots to all their residents. They may want to keep that. Some may want to change the date to May. But anyway, do others have, I see this as permissive rather than as telling towns what to do. Scott, did you?
Yes, Senator White, thank you. So just quick introduction. My name's Scott Woodward. I'm a currently serving select board member in the town of Pomfret. Two things, one comment, one question. I can attest that towns are feeling quite pressured right now with all that's going on to get things done and lined up for town meeting. I only speak for myself here, not for the rest of the board, but there may be some benefit to having the opportunity to delay. The other is a question is, does it necessarily mean that terms and other things that hinge on town meeting date would necessarily extend to whatever the town meeting date is? That's more of a technical question, but just make sure that things that currently hinge on town meeting day would carry on until town meeting actually happens.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good suggestion, yeah. I saw Karen's hand is up. You're muted, Karen.
I have
Okay.
to get used to this again, sorry. So thank you very much for having this meeting. For those towns, we would really like the flexibility because there are many towns that are going to do everything by Australian ballot, and they can do that on the regular March town meeting day. But for those towns that want to hold a portion at least, or maybe all of their meeting in person, they need the discretion to change the date. And as you mentioned, with respect to Dummerston, some of them are thinking about May or when it's warm and you can do it outside.
Any, Jim? You're muted.
Yeah, sorry.
There we go.
No, I think it was Jim Condos. Did you have
Sorry,
your
go
hand up
ahead.
too, Jim Harrison?
Well, I didn't, but you called on Jim, so.
Oh, I'm sorry.
happy to fill the void. I do have a question. I can come back to it. Thank you.
Okay, let's go to Mr. Secretary first.
Senator White, I just want to make, because I picked up a little bit of an issue, perhaps. This is really just a 1 year or half a year temporary solution authorization to deal with this issue, just like it was for this past year. Act 92 and 135 just gave me that authority to make changes up through December 31st as necessary. And I think we need to keep that in mind that, anything going forward, this is not making a permanent change. It's just making a temporary change or temporary enabling legislation to allow the cities and towns around the state to deal with this issue. And I'm sure that Karen Horn was very pleased with your comments about having more trust with the cities and towns. I mean, I actually kept doing the home rule bill for all of my Senate career that we never passed. But anyway.
Well, we've been trying, but yes, I just have to get that little comment in every single time I have the opportunity to. So, John, who is that? It just says John. Who is that? Is that?
This is John Odom.
Oh, okay. Hi. Okay, John.
Just very, very briefly, if you go this route and want to make it available for the larger towns, the Australian ballot towns too. I don't have the legislation in front of me, but do it with a careful eye towards the charters of those. For example, in Montpelier, the mayor is down as, you know, a mayor for till the next one's elected, you know, or 2 years, whichever. But for our city councilors, it just says 2 years. So you could theoretically have a period between the traditional, if we couldn't move it, or we'd have a period of a couple months with no city council. So just keep an eye on that.
Allison?
Sorry, I'm having real troubles with Zoom, so I apologize. Anyway, how does this interplay with the school budgets, which most of which are voted on at town meeting, and what will this do to delay the work that we have in setting the tax rate? And I have some concerns with town meeting dates being set too late. And I know there are towns that do have later town meetings, like you in Brattleboro, Jeanette. But what about, anyway, so that's my concern.
So I will answer that, but Karen probably can also. My guess is that the towns are well aware, and I've talked to a number of town clerks and select board people, and they are well aware of the time, the deadline, the end time here, when they need to be able to have a budget in place so that they can deal with the state, with particularly the education issue. And my preference would be to leave it to the towns to decide when to set their town meeting, knowing that they are going to have to be responsive to the state by a certain date. So and leave it to the league to make sure that they understand that. But most select boards and town clerks understand well the pressures of the end date. So that's, they're not going to set their town meetings for August or September, because that's too late. They're going to probably May is around the latest that I can imagine any town would do it. But so I think we need to have some faith that the select boards and the town clerks are smart enough to know that there is that date by which they have to have a budget certain, and that they'll deal with it. So I don't know, Karen, do you want to?
Hey, Senator White, this is Will. Can I make a quick comment?
Yeah.
Just really quickly want to remind people on this specific issue that this was the first action that our office took last spring with the authority that you all granted us with the emergency legislation. We issued a directive related to local elections that allowed municipalities to postpone their meetings. We issued that on March 31st last year, right at the beginning of things, when, at least in my mind, we were in a very similar place to what we're at now with the virus. And to me, I had most of those communications with municipalities, school districts, villages, fire districts. The ability to do that was the most useful thing right off, to at least give them flexibility to do so if they thought it was practical, and if they could do so without an effect on their budget that was too great. There were these exact same discussions, Senator Clarkson, at that time about the school budgets. And so keep in mind too, that under the school statutes, school district annual meetings can happen within a pretty wide range, a couple month period over the spring. And a lot of the schools, for instance, have their annual meetings in May already. So they were in the place then about canceling or postponing and thinking about June and the July 1 fiscal year deadline. So I just think it does speak to what Senator White was saying, that they're very conscious of it and what they need to do to meet those requirements.
May I just follow up?
Yes.
My follow-up, thank you. They don't set, the state, the legislature sets the tax rate. We need to know what the votes are. I mean, in Ways and Means, we set that tax rate. We need to know what the vote has been and what the budgets are coming in at. It is And last year, Will, most of us had our town meetings by the time you did that. Most town meetings were done by when the state closed down. So yes, we allowed going forward all the other groups, the things that fall under municipal bodies, that they may have voted later, but most towns had voted. So most school budgets were in, and Ways and Means was then able to set a statewide rate. We can't set that rate, and we're out of here hopefully by the end of May this year. We can't set that rate until the budgets are voted. I mean, or until we know what the school spending is going to be. And the school spending is determined by those votes. It's sort of a catch-22.
So Allison, I see your point, but I think that we should have some faith that our towns understand that, and that they will hold their meetings within the time frame that they need to in order to comply with that. And I trust that the league will be, and the Town Clerks Association and whoever will be working pretty hard with those towns to make sure they understand that they can't put their town meeting off, or their school budget vote off until September. I mean, but I think we have to have some faith in they've been running town meetings and setting budgets for many, many years. And we need to have some faith that they will continue to do it in a timely manner.
Jeanette, you've got a queue going on right now. I don't know if you're able to see the hands, but you've got Paulina, Gannon, and Harrison with their hands up.
I do see that. I didn't see what order they came up in, so I'm going to go from the top down here. And Senator Paulina.
Well, actually, my question was the same about the town meeting day votes on school budgets. So my question was asked, and I appreciate the answers from Jeanette and Will as well. So I'm good.
Thank you.
I do support the idea of allowing them to change the dates.
Okay. Representative Gannon.
Thank you. So I have a question for either Tucker or Betsy Ann. Select board terms, if they're for 2 years and they go to March town meeting date, if we extend the date, do the terms automatically extend, or do you have two people, or do you have two vacancies on your select board, or one vacancy, depending on? And then I have another question after that.
Tucker, did you have an answer?
So it depends on whether the municipality has its own charter provision that provides for when a successor will replace a newly elected officer, or whether they're governed by general law. And I must confess that offhand, I don't know whether general law allows for terms to expire on a date certain, or whether it allows for an officer to step in as a successor and the term to be extended. Betsy?
Oh, but we can put that in the budget, in the bill.
I can answer that, Senator White.
Okay.
There is a legal doctrine that exists that basically allows, I forget the exact name of the legal doctrine, but under general law, there's a legal doctrine that allows someone to stay in office until they are replaced by election or appointment. But they essentially carry on in their current role until they are formally replaced. But there is a legal doctrine that I believe exists.
Betsy Ann?
Betsy Ann.
Hi. Yeah, so under general law for local elections, it's 17 VSA 2646 that says at the annual meeting, towns choose their officers who shall serve until the next annual meeting and until successors are chosen, unless otherwise provided by law. So that's your general law. But Tucker raised the great point about any charters, and the Montpelier City Clerk also raised the issue of any charters that have different language that discuss just a straight 2-year term, for example. So I think that could be incorporated into this bill to ensure that if a municipality moves the date of its local meeting, that any terms that are currently in effect will continue until that meeting elects the next number of members, or the next officers for the office.
John, you had another question?
Yeah, I support this concept, but I do have one select board that I represent who has attempted to have meetings outside, and a lot of constituents have been upset by this because they haven't used any audio visual equipment. It was very difficult to hear, and I am concerned that this could be utilized to limit participation in town meeting. So I think we need to address that to some extent. I mean, and other issue with this, with respect to an outside meeting, is what if it just torrentially rains that day? How do you reschedule an outside meeting? Or do you still hold it and have one person show up?
I don't know, but we've had town meetings where there was such a huge snowstorm and ice storm that people couldn't get there and couldn't attend. I've been at a town meeting in Putney where there were just a few people because nobody who lived outside of the village could get there. So I just think we have to give some, I keep saying this, but I think that we just have to trust our select board people to know how to maneuver this, and trust that they're going to use microphones and the same as they do inside. Or anyway, Jim Harrison, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. On this section of the bill, and this may be a question for Betsy Ann or Tucker, but how do we, does it automatically synchronize what the school board wants to do and the town wants to do? Typically, those votes, when you're doing by Australian ballot, are done on the same day. And towns, multiple towns may be part of a school district, whereas individual towns are just worried about their own budget. How do we ensure that they're all done together for this temporary provision?
Betsy Ann?
The language.
Tucker, I'm sorry.
Doesn't automatically synchronize those dates, and it does not mandate that these school district votes happen at the same time as the constituent town votes. And to be honest, again, I can't remember whether under general law that is something that is required, or whether it is just required that the school district hold its votes during a period set, depending on the type of school district it is, between February and April, which I believe, seeing Betsy nod, is the case. So it's not in the provisions before you. If you want it to be, you could require that the school district have all of its municipalities, constituent municipalities, vote on the same date, which is something that I believe was a potential concern in early discussions of how to approach this.
And that would be for the school budgets, not for the town. Yeah. I see Carl, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. East Montpelier Select Board. On this issue of town and school budgets, they could be held on separate dates in East Montpelier and the other towns that share U32 and the school district there. As far as I am aware, at least in this school district, we have gone to Australian ballot for everything substantive in the school meeting. And in the town, we have a mix of floor debate and Australian ballot. And I could see that the school board might wish for timelines with contracts and so on to go ahead and hold their meeting on traditional, or their voting on traditional town meeting day. And we in the select board, and I'm speaking for myself, we haven't discussed the ins and outs of this on the select board, but we on the select board might want to postpone until a time when it's more likely that we'll have weather where we could hold it outside, or maybe the pandemic will have been somewhat abated with the vaccine being more available. So that's one point. I want to thank the chair for the continued refrain to trust the towns. We're trying to do good work for our citizens, and we're not trying to limit participation. There was an implication that that we might use new provisions, new powers to limit participation in town meetings. Believe me, if we wanted to limit participation, we know how to do that. But that's not our goal. Our goal, and we've spent some time talking about this in East Montpelier, I know other towns in the area have too, is how to get more people to come to town meeting and participate.
Thank you. I had Rob, you had your hand up. I don't see it up anymore, but.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, that was operator error. I'm working off my iPad. Thank you, though.
Okay, and I think Scott, you had your hand up too, but now I see it's down.
That's right.
Okay, so anybody else? So it seems to me that what we've talked about here is giving towns the flexibility to set their date, trusting that they'll set it in timely manner so that they can get everything done that they need to by certain dates, allowing the schools are a separate municipality, and allowing them to set the dates for their votes, because many places don't do the school budget and the town budget on the same day. So they're a municipality as the towns are. So we're not talking here about towns having the flexibility to change their dates, but municipalities having the flexibility to change their dates. Is that right? And then having some provision in there for towns with charters that would allow them to change and to make sure that they aren't caught with a period of time where they don't have select board members or city councilors or whatever they call them. Is that where we are with this, Sarah?
That sounds about right.
So if we were to put that in.
Susan Clark has her hand up.
Oh, good. Okay, thank you. Oh, hi, Susan.
Hi. Hi, everybody. Thanks for this really great initiative. Susan Clark, I'm the town moderator in Middlesex, and I'm very supportive of giving towns this kind of flexibility. One of the things that I've talked about with our select board is the possibility of having, our town meeting has some parts that are by Australian ballot. For example, we elect our officers by Australian ballot, but we have a really vibrant floor meeting. And the idea of moving that to May has some appeal. Would we, you might not know this now, but like, for example, if the school district wanted to have its vote in March, and which is all Australian ballot, and we wanted to do what we usually do by Australian ballot, also go ahead and do that in March, so that if there were a mailing of ballots and whatnot, everybody would get the ballot in March. But then do our floor meeting in May for the pieces that we don't do by Australian ballot. I don't know if we're allowed to split it up that way.
That's a great question. I've thought of that as well.
I think, and maybe Will can help here, or Karen, but I think that is the issue that John McClowry raised. And I think that one of the ways of doing that is to call your meeting to order and do the Australian, and then delay it until a date certain later on the floor ballot. But am I wrong about that, Karen?
Well, that is what John McClowry and Kirby are thinking about doing, and there's some other towns that are looking at that as well. So, and you could also, I suppose, have a special meeting at a later date to do the floor items. So there are a couple of options there.
But that's already allowed, right? We don't have to make any provisions.
No.
For that. That's already, you're already allowed to do that. I see Chris Bray has his hand up.
Good morning. So I'm just thinking about the since we have Will and Karen and many experts here at the same moment, I'm just trying to think in terms of coordination. If it turns out that there was a conflict between towns that needed to act, for instance, in a school district at the same time, because they had different goals, an outdoor meeting, whatever, I'm wondering if there's a conflict that could arise, and if we can foresee a potential disagreement and then build in something that resolves how two towns that want to go a different way, but they're in the same yoke as part of a union school district or something like that. I shouldn't say towns, but you get the idea. We could end up with some lack of coordination, and I don't know if there's a way for us to foresee it and build in a provision that resolves that kind of conflict, so people will know the rules of the road if we have a hiccup.
Well, do you have a suggestion on that? Or Tucker?
If I understand right, is Senator Bray talking about a coordination between the school district meeting and the annual meetings of the towns?
Right. I mean, there are different permutations of how you could end up with uncoordinated action, and then towns having different goals. So it's that, you know better than I do what kinds of gaps could form. And I'm just thinking, is there a way to anticipate that, or do we need to, and then build in a provision that says, here's how you resolve those things if they do arise. That's all.
Well, could you say that, because the school is a different municipality,
Sure.
It's not the same. And so when you have your school meeting, you actually adjourn your town meeting and then have your school meeting if they're on the same date. So could we, does it make sense to put something in there that says that the schools in a district have to have their school vote on the same date?
So this is Karen. The school district calls its own meeting, and historically, it's been convenient on a lot of occasions to have them on the same date, but they don't have to be on the same date. So I think if you had a unified school district, it could call its own meeting.
Okay.
And have the vote that way.
Yeah, I think you're right. So we don't even have to address that, right? Because the school district would call its meeting on a particular date, whether it was the same date as a town or not.
Right, right.
Okay.
And we've had special meetings with school districts for like bond votes and stuff that are on dates called by the school district. I don't know if Will has anything to add to that.
I agree. And I would just say I would not advise any language that required a coordination between the school district meeting and the town meetings. But Senator Bray, if you're asking also that, just to make sure we're all understanding the same thing, I think I would have to check myself, and I don't see anybody from the school boards or AOE, but I believe it's existing law already that in a union district, when they announce their annual meeting, all of the towns hold the annual meeting on the same day.
Yes.
That's never, and then I would leave that as it is and not have any coordination between the annual meetings of those towns and the school district's annual meeting.
Okay, well, thanks. I just wanted to check in. I would not want to add something that was unhelpful. I just was.
So Rob, I see your hand is up. Is that a question
Yes.
or technical glitch?
Well, it's a bit more of a statement. In the Barry town, we already do this in that we have the school budgets are voted on in March, and all the school directors are voted on in March. And then in May is when we actually vote on the municipal budget and select board members and things like that. And we also, because we're kind of a union school district between Barry town and Barry city, everybody votes for the school district on the same, or school budgets and stuff like that on the same day. So it has actually worked out very well for us. We've been doing this for a very long time, actually. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, are there any, if we were to put this provision into a bill that would allow the towns the flexibility, that would allow the municipalities the flexibility to change their meeting date and trust them to change it to a time when they need to. Does anybody have any disagreement with that? Senator Collmore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not disagreeing, first of all, let me just say, but I live in a town where we have a rather robust floor session. So I've invited Carrie Clark to join us today. This is the first time that she's ever attended, I think, although it's not really a committee hearing, but a get together. So I'm just going to ask her whether she might want to weigh in on anything that she's heard so far that might create an issue that we haven't thought about. But I think I've come full circle to agree with the proposal. Carrie, thank you very much for taking time.
Carrie?
Hi, thank
Hi.
you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
So as far as what you're discussing right now, I don't have anything to weigh in about because I think that we as a board, obviously I can't speak for the board, but I believe that we will maintain the March date. But I do agree with you talking about having the flexibility for other towns to move the date. I do have some other ideas further if you discuss the town meeting and how mail-in elections might go, and that might be further in your discussions. But I do thank you for inviting me to this.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you for coming. So we will, okay, so I'm gonna check that one off. I'm checking that one off. Okay, so the second issue that many people seemed to agree with was giving the towns the ability, the flexibility to mail out their Australian ballots if they so choose. Now, we've already given towns the ability to, for the select boards to decide if they want to do Australian ballot. Does that go into this year also, or did that end? And do we have to do that again? And now let's talk about mailing out ballots. And again, this is the flexibility. This isn't not saying that all towns have to mail them out. This is allowing the town to decide if they want to mail it out. And in Susan's situation there, it might be a combination. Anybody want to kick off this conversation about mailing?
This is Karen, and I was actually somewhat surprised that if towns have authority to use Australian ballot, that they don't have authority to mail Australian ballots. That seemed a little counterintuitive. So I would—
You don't trust towns, Karen, you know that.
I would strongly urge providing that authority to local governments. Otherwise, you only have half the pie.
I see John Odom has a question.
Just clarification. You're talking about allowing towns to do the all mail-in election like we did for the general. Is that correct?
Mail out.
Mail out. I think there's an irony here in that in giving towns the flexibility, you may be taking it away in the process. If one town does it, there's going to be pressure on every town to do it, especially the bigger towns. And we just might not be in a position to do that with quick turnarounds, with personnel, but there will be that pressure. You know, if Burlington does it, my constituents are going to say, well, why aren't we doing it? And then we're in a position we have to do it. So I think that would be a domino effect that could take away some of our flexibility and put us in a tricky position, at least some of us.
Well, currently you don't have the authority to do it at all.
May I just make a comment about that? Because we had a conversation earlier with the Secretary of State's office and a few other people, and my understanding is that the governor is actually thinking about putting some funding in to help towns with the mailing of ballots. So that might take some of the pressure off towns that are looking at it, but may not think that they can afford it in the current environment.
So I see Jim Harrison has his hand up here, but I'm going to ask Kendall if you would like to weigh in here with a comment.
Sure. Can folks see and hear me okay?
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Kendall Smith from Governor Scott's office. Yes, as some folks on this call might recall, during the restated budget for FY21, the governor had set aside, I believe it was $1 million of CRF funds to start planning for and printing, mailing, etc., ballots for town meeting day in March. It wasn't CRF eligible at the time. It's still not, given when the money has to be expended, but he wanted to get the conversation started this fall, and he is willing to explore putting money in an FY22 budget or BAA, given the short time frame here, to provide resources for towns to print and mail ballots. I can't say, and I want to be clear, that I am not in a position to commit him to that 100% right now in this call. We're still very much in the budget development process, and I know the legislators at least saw some of our fiscal challenges yesterday in a briefing. So we're still in the thick of it. But yes, it is something that he is actively considering, and something that we did set aside, or tried to set aside some money for previously.
And I think we heard from the Secretary of State's office that probably $1 million, if all the towns did it, would suffice. But my guess is that there are many towns that aren't going to do this. They're just going to change their date.
Right. So I know the right amount might still be up in the air depending on what this final package looks like. But my understanding as well is between 1 and 2 million would probably be a good bogey.
So Jim, Representative Harrison, I saw you have your hand up.
Yeah.
I'm getting
Thank you,
good at
Madam
this
Chair.
hand thing. Okay.
You know, I first of all, I want to give credit to the Secretary of State's office, and specifically Will Senning. Some of us may have been, you know, had questions about how the mail-in balloting was going to work in the fall. And from all indications, it worked very well and turnout increased. I'm one of those that don't think it really changed a whole lot in terms of the individual outcomes, but people can draw their own conclusions on that. But we had more people to participating. Arguably, we're in a worse situation today with the pandemic than we were back in the spring, or certainly earlier in the fall when this was all happening. And we should do everything we can to encourage mail-in balloting for this election. And then hopefully we're beyond that later in the spring, and then we can talk about how to go forward in the future and what makes sense. But for certainly now, I strongly support the enabling legislation that's in the draft bill. And if there's any way we can provide financial assistance to strongly encourage and make that available for towns to utilize in school districts, we should absolutely do that. I don't sit on the appropriations committee and don't know how all the numbers work sometimes, but I think we should do whatever we can to encourage that option if that's what we're going to do. Thank you.
Thanks. Other people?
Senator White, this is Carol Dawes.
Hi, Carol.
Hi, I'm sorry, my video's not working and I can't raise my hand, so I'm stuck with just jumping in. I wanted to echo what John Odom said with regards to whether communities might or might not mail ballots out. To me, the money is less of a concern than the very tight timeline. Warning dates for town meetings, when the ballots are available. My ballots aren't available until the statutory 20 days, and to mail 6,000 ballots out in the amount of time that we would have might preclude us making the decision to do a general mailing like that. And it could create that sense of inequity around the state. What I had been toying with is doing something similar to what the state did in August, which is doing a postcard mailing, which I could do well in advance and encourage people to sign up for absentee ballot requests. And then we would mail them as once the ballots became available. But it is a very small window.
So if, given the window, this doesn't say that you have to mail out your ballots on March 2nd. It would give you the option, I would think, of mailing out ballots when you have your town meeting. So you could change your town meeting to April 15th, and then you'd have more time, and you could choose to mail out your ballots. It doesn't say that if you're going to mail out your ballots, you have to do it on a regular town meeting day.
No, that's true. And if a community did want to move their date, then that does frees up some time. But if we are looking, it's not that I'm against it. I'm for the idea of allowing communities the freedom to mail ballots. I just wanted to support what John said and let you know that there will be communities that can't do that if they stick with the March date because of various and sundry reasons, either financial or the very tight time frames.
Yep. Rob?
Well, I'm curious, can we change, the statutory as far as the timelines and things like that go, so that it gives the select board, city councils, the bodies that they need, the time, if we were going to do the mail ballots, they could. And I guess I have a question for Carol and John as well. Second is, has there been any sort of formal survey or informal survey done of your members? Or are you two here just representing yourselves?
This is Carol. No, there hasn't been a discussion amongst the VMCTA members. So at the moment, I'm here as a city clerk.
Same here, and representing my community as an elected official, but no, just me.
Okay, so back to my first part of the question: is there something that we could do to change the timelines and the constraints around that?
Well, if we gave them the ability to change the date of their town meeting, then they have that ability.
Good point. So they go hand in hand then, statutorily.
I think that I'm not sure.
Well, I think what Representative Leclerc might be thinking about are some of the deadlines Carol was talking about, like the 20 days before that the ballots are due. That is driven by it. So to make a ballot, you need ballot content, right? You need to know who the people are who are running. So you get that content 6 Mondays before the election under current law, which is in late January. I forget the date off the top of my head. That's sort of the biggest driver at this point. And your petitioned articles are due 47 days before the meeting. So you could think about, I've heard people suggest moving those either way to make the situation easier. Some clerks are thinking, I want to have that information earlier so I can make the ballot earlier so I can mail it out. That would entail moving those deadlines up into earlier January to require that content to be established earlier on. That would mean moving those deadlines essentially up to the time when you're talking about passing the bill is the difficulty, right? In like the second week of January. Just the nature of the fact that the earliest you guys could get a bill passed is the second week of January. These meetings are 6 weeks later. I think no matter how you tinker with the deadlines among that, that's a Herculean task to get your ballots developed and to get a mailing house in place and to figure out how you pre-post everything coming back to you. So I just think no matter how you mess with those deadlines a little bit right now, it's going to be very difficult for towns to set up this mailing if they don't know that they're authorized to do so until the second week of January, and to have it be effective for March 3rd. That's one comment. Just while I have the floor, I want to mention that in terms of costs, you really need to think about two major costs. And it's printing of the envelopes themselves that they'll use to do the mailing. And then it's the postage on those envelopes. My office would probably be able to, if there were funds allocated, coordinate on a statewide basis the printing of the envelopes. So we could take orders from clerks right now about how many envelopes they need and work with our printer who did the printing of the envelopes for the last year, Jet Service, to print envelopes and ship them out to the towns in the quantities they'd told us. We don't, to my knowledge, I've been looking into it over the last couple of weeks. I don't think we have the money in our budget right now to cover that. We didn't budget when we established our budget this year for providing envelopes for all towns for annual meeting. And we also certainly don't have in the budget the money that would be required for postage for those envelopes. And just to be clear with everybody, just like the governor's office, we can't use our COVID funds after the 31st of this month. So funding would need to be identified. I think our office would be able to step up, like I said, in terms of coordinating printing of the envelopes. We would not be able to coordinate postage for all of those towns. That would have to be done on a town by town basis, and the towns would have to find mailing houses themselves to coordinate that process with. And that's a big task, and it's really something they would ideally need to know now to start setting up appropriately. I'd probably sound like I did in April talking about what the task that was in front of us.
So just a question, if you had, and then Carl, I see you have your hand up, and then John, if towns knew that they were going to have the ability to mail out their ballots at whatever date, whether they mailed it out on March 2nd or whatever town meeting is this year, or if they mailed them out in April or May, if you had a count from all the towns of how the towns that want to do that and knew how many envelopes needed to be printed, could you use COVID money now to get those printed? Why?
Because it's for use for elections this year. In response to this year, and that would be using it for election.
But could we use non-election COVID money for that? That's what I was thinking of, not election COVID money, but the unallocated, there is some unallocated COVID CRF money.
That's what I believe Kendall was saying is not available, but that's
correct.
Okay.
Sorry, Kendall again. Yes, CRF needs, any CRF period across the board needs to be expended by the end of the month.
Right, but that's what I was thinking was that if all the towns figured out whether they were going to send out ballots, and they got an order that said, we're going to need, across the state, we're going to need 150,000 ballot or envelopes. Could the Secretary of State have them printed now and use CRF money, because it would be expended before December 30th?
I understand what you're saying, and we've tried to look at those scenarios before. I see the Secretary of State may also want to chime in here, but our guidance from Guidehouse, who some of the legislators may have heard us say before, that helps us determine those issues, is that we've looked at that for things like IT projects for the state and stuff too. Can we buy services now that will be used for the coming year? And generally the guidance back in terms of a safe audit trail is no.
Okay, thanks. Okay. Did the Secretary of State want to weigh in on that? And then I have Carl and John.
Yeah, I just want to make it clear. I think Will made it clear, but I want to make it really clear. The Election Cares Act money that we have can only be used this year and for federal elections only. Yeah. We could not use it for local elections. And you would still have to get clearance and I'm not familiar with it, but from Guidehouse, as to whether you could use regular state CRF money to pay for election-related stuff. So at the local level, I don't know if that's possible. That's something you would have to have the administration look at. But it would also be, it's probably doable, Senator, but trying to get that list of requests from all the towns in a very, I mean, we might have a short window of a week or less to get that information in order to process that many envelopes, because you still have to get the envelopes, and then the towns are still responsible for postage unless the state steps up.
No, I get that. I was just trying to figure out how to spend the money and get what we needed. But Carl?
Yes, thank you. I think some of Will's comments addressed the point that I was going to make, but I'll make it anyway, just so you get the town's perspective on this. This will be about the 10th year that I've been involved in putting together the budget and everything else for the town meeting warning. And with the timeline that you are talking about for this bill, with it being signed on January 16th or the following Tuesday, and our normal timelines, we are going to need to assume that this bill will not pass until it is actually passed and signed and operate on our normal timelines. And by the time January 16th or the following Tuesday rolls along, we will have done everything but put the final, dot the final I's and cross the final T's on it. So extending deadlines or shortening deadlines, it's not going to really help us in a practical way, as far as I can see.
Thanks, Carl. John? Odom?
Sure. Just a couple things to keep in mind. Following up on Will talking about the major expenses for towns. The other major expense in there that he didn't mention is staffing. For example, in Montpelier, we're a 2-person operation for elections, and we have to take care of all the regular clerk functions, the other clerk functions rather, during that time. So I actually had to bring in extra staff and got a grant to cover it. Nothing's going to be available for that. And it's important to remember that in other states, Oregon, Washington, Utah, that have done this all mail-in elections, there's historically with states like ours, the municipal local elections have a lower turnout, the general elections have a higher turnout. With all mail, they equalize at the higher level. So doing an all mail out election, we would all be breaking turnout records, or the ballot towns for annual town meetings. So that's just, those two things together are just something to bear in mind. I'm not arguing against anything, but just,
So I know that individual towns are going to have issues that they have to deal with, but is there any reason not to give them the flexibility to mail out their Australian ballots for those towns that choose to do it? Does anybody have any opposition to having that in the bill? It's just giving them the ability to mail them out if they want to. Rob?
Thank you. I actually don't think I have any concerns about that. I just had a question for Secretary of State's office, and I think Secretary Kondos addressed it. So any COVID relief money that we were able to use for elections for this year can't be carried into next year. Question I had though was I keep hearing about envelopes. Did all the envelopes that were sent out for this election, were they all used? Do we have some left over that for communities, say, that wanted to do an Australian ballot? Are there supplies left over? Do we know?
Rob, I can answer that fairly quickly. The envelopes that were sent for the general election, they won't be able to reuse if they have additional ones, because they were pre-posted. The ones going out have permits on them from the mailing house, so they actually don't have those envelopes. And the ones coming back had meters that are unique to this year that expire on December 31st. However, a lot of the towns do have existing stock of envelopes from prior years that didn't have that postage issue. And for the August primary, we did 50% of the envelopes pre-posted and the other 50% not, where it just has a place to apply a stamp. So the short answer is there is some existing stock out there, and that's why it's very hard to anticipate, because it's variable among towns, whether they're going to need a whole new set for annual meeting or whether they've got some in their storage that they can use or not.
Okay, thank you, Will.
Brian?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just want to follow up on Rob's question a little bit. I'm trying to remember the number. Somewhere around $3 million, I think, was given to the state by the federal government to take care of that election. How much did we spend, and how much is left, and where is that going to go?
Good question, Senator. And after the election, I have finally had time to put most of that together, and I just recently got to the best number that I've gotten to yet. And it looks like we're going to have spent about 2.6 of that 3 million, a little over. So actually we've got about 350,000 left, and that will go back to the feds on December 31st if it's not spent.
Thank you, Will. And I concur with Representative Harrison. You guys did a great job on the election, for sure.
Thank you.
If the towns are going to wind up being responsible for the postage, can you give us a range? Obviously, it depends on how many people are in the town, but of what that might cost a particular town to do the mail-out ballots? Just a range.
Yeah, it is difficult because you don't know the weight of all the materials they're putting in there, but I'm trying to remember. I think ours were 80 cents going out and 65 cents coming back. So you take those numbers and multiply them by the voters.
Okay. And I support the mail out unless my town clerk says no. So.
Well, this isn't telling towns that they
I understand.
mail out. This is giving
them the flexibility.
The flexibility to mail out the ballots, and the towns will have to deal with their issues. Like John raised the issue of having extra people. Towns will have to deal with that just as they would with any other election issues. But is there any reason to not put this in the bill? The flexibility for the towns to, does anybody have any, want to weigh in on not putting this in? I don't see anybody's hands, and I don't see anybody waving around.
I can't think of a reason not to.
Okay, so Tucker and Betsy Ann, you have that. So the third issue that this smaller group had talked about and that they have in the draft bill was this flexibility for the providing some flexibility for the Secretary of State's office. And Will, if you want to just explain what that is about and why you think it's necessary to have in there.
Sure. That actually didn't come directly from me, but did come up in those earlier conversations. I think it really is just meant to provide us the opportunity to put any other quick administrative fixes in place after this bill passes throughout the spring for local elections. It really would mirror the authority we were given at the end of March last year to handle local elections.
Does anybody have any issues around that, about why that should or shouldn't be in there? Okay. We'll leave that language there then.
Senator Clarkson has her physical hand up.
Oh, I can see her physical hand. Okay, Senator Clarkson.
I think if we trust the towns, we trust the Secretary of State's office.
Well, that's pushing it.
Anyway, I think we're good so far on all three measures.
Okay, so I've checked off all those three things.
Karen Horn has her hand up now.
Huh?
Karen Horn has her hand up,
Karen,
and Scott Woodward.
Okay. And then Scott, yep.
Are you moving on to other issues?
Not quite yet.
Because I do have two others related to this.
Yep.
One is that.
No, just hold off a minute.
Oh, yes.
Okay. Scott, what was your comment? Was it on that?
No, it was not. I was just preemptively raising my hand for other issues.
Okay, so now what I want to do is, there is another issue that may or may not need discussion here. It has been brought up, and that is allowing the need to have signatures on a petition in order to get a warning, an article on the warning. And that is a question, and I don't know if it needs discussion or if we can just give towns the ability to collect electronic signatures. So let's talk about that issue. Allison, and then Scott and Karen.
My understanding, because I believe our town, Woodstock, has already waived the requirement for signatures on the nonprofits that come to the town to be request to be put on the ballot. Their additional, so I thought they already had the authority to do that, and they think they have the authority to do that.
Yes.
The additional question, which I sent to Jeanette and Will and Chris, was do they also have that ability to do that
Yes.
for tax exempt properties that would also be voted on at town meeting? And Jeanette said yes. So
A select board has the ability to put anything on the warning that they want that is appropriate to the town meeting. I mean,
Right.
they probably wouldn't put something on about the federal budget, for example, but they have the ability. They don't. If one person calls and says, "I'd like you to put this on the warning," they can do that, but the petition gives the citizens the right to have something put on that a select board may not want on there. And it's the right for the citizens to have something on their ballot, because sometimes select boards don't want things on the ballot. And a certain number of citizens may want it on the ballot. So that's what this is. So if we completely did away with them having to have petitions, that means that one person could call and say, "I want this on the warning," and they'd have to put it on if we eliminated the need for any signatures. But and I'm not sure we want that. In my town, I can tell you, we might have some pretty crazy things on our warning. And so can we collect electronic signatures is the question. And I think, Scott, you had some thoughts about that.
I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. So again, I am a select board member, and so I deal with a lot of these things on a regular basis. Other jurisdictions in the country have adopted electronic signatures as a way to accommodate COVID and petitions, voter initiated ballots, ballot measures. So I think the key here for me, both as a select board member and as a resident, is to ensure the direct democracy process. So however this shakes out, whether it's electronic signatures or making sure that select boards don't become selective in what they put on the warning or not, that direct democracy is protected. I have seen quite disjointed, even within my own town, judgment about what is allowed to go on the warning or not. And I personally don't want that to occur. I would like the select boards to, if they're allowed to use their own discretion, that there be some guidepost established. Because I wouldn't want to see select boards have the ability to pick and choose and say, well, we'll put this one on the warning, but not that one just because we don't like it. And that should be avoided.
Thank you. And I I know that she doesn't have her hand up here, but I would like to ask Kelly to weigh in on this.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I think that allowing for electronic signatures is the best way to go. I think the voters need to have the ability to put something on the warning if the select board says that they aren't opting to put it on the warning themselves. And in the interest of safety, allowing for electronic signatures is the best option. I think that that's a really important thing to keep in place.
So Kelly is not only a representative, but is the Londonderry Town Clerk. So she is dealing with this all the time.
All the time.
Anybody else? Oh, I see Karen and then John.
Well, yes, I would agree with Kelly, and that electronic signatures could be allowed. We do have one suggestion on language actually regarding letting the town delay voter petitions special municipal meetings. And I sent a memo to you just before the meeting started, my apologies, with some language around that the legislative body not be required to call a special town meeting during a state of emergency until after 60 days after the state of emergency is over, or the town's next annual meeting, because that could just throw a significant wrench into the works if they got petitioned to have a special town meeting. So anyway, that's one consideration. But with respect to, we do think that having signatures on a petition is important. And I think Betsy Ann may be able to remind us that you dealt with the electronic signatures and municipal authority in the spring sometime, which was about 100 years ago.
Betsy?
I think maybe what you're referring to is just the waiving the requirement for local election candidates to collect voter signatures in order to have their name be printed on the ballot. That signature requirement was waived just for local candidates. I don't recall the conversation about electronic signatures generally. Am I overlooking a prior conversation, or could you remind me?
Tucker has his hand up.
Well,
yeah, we discussed electronic signatures, I believe, with the Secretary of State's office in Senate GovOps in the spring, and it was in relation to transactions that municipalities were carrying out and whether or not they could use electronic signatures to verify official documents. Mm-hmm. I think this related specifically to municipal clerks. Ultimately, we determined that the Uniform Electronic Transactions Act in Title IX did allow government agencies to use electronic signatures unless there was a more specific law that required a wet ink signature, which is what we refer to as a physical signing requirement. I cannot provide an accurate legal opinion right now as to whether the Title 17 requirements for signatures on voter petitions would be interpreted as a physical signature requirement. It would not fall under the Uniform Electronic Transactions Act. And another tricky part of the UETA to recall is that it requires consent to electronic signatures by both parties that are agreeing to the document. It is a bit easier when the municipality is carrying out a financial act under the signature of an official officer. I think it would be a little bit more difficult to apply this to individual voters who are agreeing to a petition. I do know that in a nearby town that provides fire services to my town, I have already received an individual petition form in the mail to sign, and it is my understanding that some municipalities are doing that, just mailing out individual petition pages to voters to sign and return.
Can I ask a question, Madam Chair? For petitions, though, it's it's not always the municipality that is sending around the petition. It's generally an individual voter or group of voters who are the one gathering the petition. So is that where that becomes legally sticky? Is that it's not the municipality asking for signatures, it's a transaction between two other people that's then getting turned over to the municipality?
Two levels. I think it's sticky in whether or not the UETA even applies to voter signed petitions. And I think it's further sticky by the requirement for the clerk to certify the validity of those signatures when the petition is delivered.
That's a really good summary from Tucker of that issue. It's in fact probably the best one I've heard yet, Tucker. Nice work. And we have we have taken the position that the signatures required in Title 17 are required to be wet and that the UETA doesn't apply. But I know that that's a gray area. And I'm aware that there are municipal attorneys out there who disagree with me about that. And you're right, we talked about it in the spring with reference to the candidates getting on our statewide ballots, like all of you, and did not want to do that because we did not have a system in place at the state level to collect electronic signatures, and that takes significant time to develop. We don't have statewide, subject matter petitions, as you guys know, aside from constitutional amendments, so that issue hasn't presented itself at the statewide level for us. Having said all that, I think we would be comfortable with an allowance for individual legislative bodies to accept electronic signatures right now, but it would be 100% up to that legislative body to figure out the mode and method of doing so.
Okay, John, and then Brian.
Yeah, forgive me for continually being pedantic, but as much as anything, I'm just trying to inoculate you all when you take public testimony. Just so you know, electronic signatures are going to be inherently hackable. Somebody wanting to cause mischief could, take something off, they could add people on. I'm kind of agnostic about it, but just wanted to make sure you all were prepared for questions like that.
You're right, they will be. And my guess is that many of them are issues that I cannot see anybody hacking into. The issue of whether the Putney Gun Club should be exempt from property tax for the next 5 years, and whether anybody outside of Putney cares about that. But
you'd be surprised, actually.
Well, I might be, but anyway, Brian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess the longer we talk about this, the less attractive it seems to me. I'll just make a couple of points. I did not see the benefit of suspending the requirement for candidate signatures, to be fair, at least in my corner of the world. We had people that wound up on the ballot who did not participate at all in the elective process. They refused to get interviewed. They were not trying to get any votes. I think they just enjoyed seeing their name on the ballot. And I felt badly at one point. I should have probably run for president because that would have been allowed in the situation that we had. We had, I think, 24 or 25 candidates, Will, on the presidential ballot in the state, 23. So anyway, that said, I don't see any difference between going shopping at a grocery store and being close to people in that fashion and asking someone to sign a petition with real ink on real paper. So I'm not a big fan of this electronic thing. I don't think as yet. I think Will's brought up some interesting points, and so that's where I am.
Anybody else? Scott?
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of points. Actually, one quick response to Senator Collmore. I sort of agree and sort of disagree with your last point. Sometimes the best conversations in trying to get people to sign petitions is when you knock on their door and they invite you in. Maybe they don't invite you into their living room, but you stand in the entry hallway of their house and have a conversation about the benefits of a petition. And those are some of the best conversations to gain signatures. It's not just a general store putting a petition out and sending out a blast to the listserv and say, please sign my petition. The best conversations happen when you really can have a lengthy conversation with a voter. So I hear you on one point, but I think if it's not safe right now to be knocking on doors and having conversations in people's homes. And by not having that ability, we are cutting into the direct democracy process. So that's one comment. The other is I'd like to highlight, just to make sure as context, that everyone understands that there are guardrails around the petition process. Voter-backed petitions have limited scope in that they can only be petitioned for things that voters have jurisdiction over. And the select board has the ability to ensure that those petitions are warned as advisory if they do not apply to a topic that is within the bounds of voters. So there are some statutory guardrails in place that we should keep in mind in whether to be liberal or not around signatures.
Thank you, Karen.
Yeah, so just a couple of comments. We did discuss in the spring and that you need only 5% of the registered voters for a petition, and actually in some towns like Pownell and Putney, that's not very many people. And so it is feasible to get those signatures physically. Also, I know that at least in my town, petitions get left at the post office or at the general store or someplace like that, and people just sign them there. So that's also one method for physical signatures. I'd be a little concerned, I'm sort of going back on what I said earlier, but I'd be a little bit concerned about every town figuring out what method to use to accept electronic signatures if they were required to do that. So maybe we stay with the physical signature requirement for petitioned items, not for candidates, but for petitioned items.
So why would we not give them the flexibility to, and if a town is, some towns may be more set up and more capable of allowing electronic signatures, and some towns may choose not to do, but why would we not give them the flexibility in this as well as in the other areas?
You're right, my bad.
I mean, I don't.
No, you're right. And you know, I just signed an agreement for a fairly hefty loan yesterday with marking an X on a computer screen. So it can be done.
Yeah, and John may decide he doesn't want to. The city council in Montpelier may decide they don't want to do it because so many people come into the city of Montpelier and they can sign at the grocery store or whatever. And Kelly may decide that in her town, the meeting places have dwindled, and it's going to be easier to allow electronic signatures, and she can figure out how to do that. So I see, Scott, you have your hand up again?
Yes, Madam Chair. Just a couple of quick points. One is, you know, Pomfret, just to illustrate why flexibility could be important here. Pomfret is unfortunately in a bit of a pickle right now. Our general store is under major renovation, which is also a post office. So right now we have one of the key places where people would be able to sign petitions that will not be available for anyone to get signatures. And so if a voter-backed petition went out today in Pomfret, the only option would be to knock on people's doors. We don't have any place to put it except for the town office. And I know the town clerk doesn't want people coming in and out at that level. So I guess that's an argument in favor of flexibility. The other point I would make is that I would actually argue in favor of the legislature creating flexibility for the petitioners, not at the discretion of the select board to choose whether electronic signature or not. Because in the same way, a select board could deny putting a petition on the warning, they could also deny electronic signatures. So I would, if electronic signatures is entertained as a method of gaining signatures, I would leave that to the petitioners to choose.
Oh, I see what you mean. So I saw Allison, Mr. Secretary, and then John Gannon.
So, well, the town would still need to be able to deal with the electronic signatures. So somebody, I mean, so this is not our decision here to possibly create flexibility around electronic signatures for towns to use. Doesn't preclude the towns also choosing to just accept the petitions that were successfully handed in last year and just warning those petitioned amounts to give to HCRS or to whoever they choose. They still have that right to do that now, right? This isn't going to have effect on that. This is just broadening their ability to possibly have more items that would be petitioned by the public.
Yeah, what this would do is currently the select board can put anything on the warning that they want, any article. But as was pointed out, there are times when select boards don't want to see them on there. And so, and it isn't just for nonprofits to be part of the budget. There are a lot of things that people petition.
Right.
So
I got it. I just, yeah.
Mr. Secretary?
So from my standpoint, I think the issue is how do you provide a flexibility that all towns have the ability to do it, but also at the same time, I don't know if I'm not sure, and Scott, you would probably know better than I would, but the ability, we could have, if 100 towns decided to do something like this, there could be 100 different ways of getting these signatures. I'm sure that there are many companies out there who have software for this. And I can tell you that our office at the current time, between now and I don't know, town meeting day, we have no bandwidth to review, to find out, I mean, I think you need to have somebody that can look at these programs and decide which ones are good, which ones are bad, what kind of security do they have. John Odom raised a really, really good question, and that is the security issue, the cybersecurity. And I know Scott knows a little bit about that as well. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't do it, but I guess we could leave it up to the towns, just give them the flexibility and let them have that decision making. But I also don't want to start putting too much on this bill. If you expect to get this bill passed through the House, the Senate, and signed by the governor inside of 2 weeks, it's got to be agreed on and bare bones leading up to that.
Right. That's what we're trying to do here is if there is general agreement on flexibility for signatures, then, and the towns are going to have to figure it out if they want to do that.
Yeah. And Madam Chair, I also want to say that Chris and I, we're not avoiding you, but we have a budget meeting with the administration in a few minutes. So we're going to have to get off.
Okay.
Will remain on.
So I saw John Gannon, you had your.
Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have to agree with Secretary Condos about the electronic signature thing. I mean, especially leaving it up to the petitioner to decide what electronic signature should or should not be. You could have multiple petitions coming into a town using different technologies, some of which may be, I'm going to decide if you send me an email with your name on it, that's an electronic signature. And then it's going to be up to the town to decide whether or not that's appropriate. I mean, I think there needs to be some guidance around what would constitute an electronic signature. And I agree with Secretary Condos. If we start adding on to this bill, it will have difficulty getting through the House and Senate. The other thing is Tucker already suggested a solution for the petition issue, which is mailing a petition with a signature page to voters. That's perfectly legal right now. And so you could get the signed signature and then you're just mailing it back to the petitioner. It will cost a little more for the people involved, but that still is available. So, I mean, unless we're going to provide guidance on this, and, you know, I don't even know where to start. I mean, I know a couple of companies that do electronic signatures, but I think just leaving it up to the towns would be, or even worse, the petitioners would be very problematic.
Okay, I guess you could mail it out, but if I wouldn't know where to start. And by the time I got a petition mailed out to 5% of the voters in Putney, I'd either have to mail out an envelope. I'd have to mail out to lots and lots of people, and they'd each have to individually sign. It couldn't be like a round robin thing because there isn't time between now and then to get 5% and have it forwarded and forwarded and forwarded. But I see some issues here. I want to give the towns the as much flexibility as possible, but if this is an issue that is going to stop the bill, then so if somebody else, Carl, you had your hand up, and then Scott.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to return the attention to who this possible provision would help. Again, with this bill getting signed at the earliest January 16th, towns preparing for all their deadlines as if they were operating under current law, which they will be until this bill is signed, then any organization that is counting on being able to gather electronic signatures would either have to make the gamble that it's going to pass and as put forward and proceed starting this month or early January, or they're going to be cautious and say, we're going to go with what we know we can do. So I think this is an interesting idea, and I thank you for your interest in giving towns flexibility. I'm just not sure that this particular year with this particular timeline, including it in the bill, would help anybody.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Scott.
Madam Chair, thank you. Just a few more comments. One is I want to clarify a comment I made earlier around electronic signatures. I didn't mean to suggest it would be the Wild West of picking and choosing any electronic signature method. I merely meant to say that it shouldn't be up to the select board to choose whether to accept electronic signatures. But I believe that out there, this is a problem that's already been solved. There is a time crunch here with where we're at. But I would believe that there's language out there in other jurisdictions, state of Washington, state of California, that have general language to hem in the electronics, the boundaries of what constitutes a valid electronic signature. So there may be some blueprints to borrow from out there, something to look at. But I guess on the point of whether loading the bill up and hampering its ability to get through the legislature, speaking both as a select board member and as a private citizen who might petition for something, I would rather see the legislature waive the signature requirement if electronic signatures is too complicated. The reason why I say that is there, again, just to reiterate, there are guardrails in place that allows or precludes voters from petitioning for things that are not within their purview. And if a petitioner petitions for something that is not within the voter's power to do, the select board already has the authority to warn it as advisory and is under no obligation to honor the petition. This is black letter law that already exists. So there are guardrails in place that allows or precludes silly things from ever happening, because again, select boards are not obligated to honor petitions that are affirmatively voted on that don't have anything to do with voter jurisdiction.
Yeah, that's true. Anthony? I see your hand is up.
I had to unmute. I really lean towards wanting to provide flexibility, but there's another thought that I keep coming back to, which is that as a citizen who wants to get something on the ballot, on the agenda, might I feel that my town made it more difficult than another town to do that? And I might feel like as if my democratic process has been hindered by the fact that my select board has made it more difficult in my town than it is in a town down the road. And so I don't know. It makes me uneasy to think that some people might feel like they have a process that's more difficult to apply to get on the agenda than another town does. So I hesitate to make that possibility.
So what if we, Scott's suggestion, waived the necessity for signatures on petitions as we did for candidates?
I think that is better because it means it'd be across the board, it'd be the same for everybody in every town. I think that is a better way to go.
Anybody else?
Madam Chair, this is Carol Dawes, Berry City. I hate to be a curmudgeon. My concern with a complete waiver is, to be perfectly frank, we'll have a run on our ballot and our budget. I've already had at least half a dozen phone calls from organizations who would qualify under the language in the statute to have funding request questions put on the ballot if they followed the normal procedure. And if we waived the petition requirement, they would just be placed on the ballot. And our council has a real concern about that. What is currently, $150,000 annual allocations increasing exponentially under these conditions.
Jim Harrison, okay.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I would echo Carol's comment. You could have a huge run on any group putting on the ballot. What have they got to lose? It's sort of like Senator Collmore running for president. What has he got to lose?
Thank you for your support.
I would have voted for you, Brian.
I would have too.
Thank you.
Yeah, but I think we need to be very careful. I think it's much more appropriate to give the select board the ability to renew the ones that are on the ballot. And if someone's not on the ballot and want to get on it, put that petition out at your general store and good luck. I just think we're opening a hornet's nest to just allow anybody to get on the ballot. And towns, it will impact town budgets because most ballot initiatives pass.
Allison?
I would echo that. This has taxpayer implication. Waiving signatures and so it has a tax impact on people. Waiving signatures for a candidate has no financial monetary impact on people. This would, or conceivably would. And so I would be cautious about waiving the signatures on petitions.
Chris Bray and then Scott.
I'm thinking back to something Scott was saying about advisory versus binding questions, petition questions. I don't know if you might treat them differentially. for instance, if there's a financial implication, if it's within the jurisdiction of the town, if you would have a more protective threshold, as in, as opposed to merely advisory questions, which can be, you know, amusing but strange, you know, that kind of thing.
Scott?
I understand the concerns about and every town is different. There may be a floodgate in one town and not a floodgate of what we would consider appropriation petitions, not on other matters. I just want to echo what I said at the top is I believe the legislature has an obligation, no matter what, to protect what our only form of direct democracy here. And I understand the complications. I understand loading up bills. I understand all of the arguments against it. But I would ask the committees and the legislature to err on the side of ensuring the protection of what we have as our form of direct democracy. And, you know, maybe, you know, others have pointed out that the 5% signature requirement is not a huge hurdle. But I do, I guess if I personally had to choose between a bill that doesn't stand a chance of getting passed by trying to solve the electronic signature part of this, I still think that might be solvable. I think there are ways to find valid, figure out how to get valid electronic signatures. So I wouldn't give up on that avenue as a method to get this through. But I don't think it's really necessarily going to be terrible either waiving the signature. Appropriation, I mean, every town's different, right? But just to give you an example, last year, the town of Pomfret, we did warn an appropriation article to hire a regional energy coordinator that would have cost us $10,000 a year. So that was an appropriation article. And we put it on the warning, it got voted down because there was a healthy debate over whether that was really a good idea or not. And so I actually think it's not a bad thing to get things on in front of voters to let them debate the pluses and minuses of a given ballot measure. And if voters just blindly approve appropriation measures, that's their choice, right? That is the choice of voters. That is the will of voters if that's how it shakes out. But, you know, there are healthy debates that go on around appropriations. I see it every year. So I don't think it's the end of the day if the legislature even allows appropriation measures to get on the ballot or the warning. That is part of democracy.
So there are many, I guess I hadn't even thought about this as an appropriations issue, because in Putney, we don't do it that way. We have a whole process that takes place with our social service agencies, and then the select board puts them in their budget. We don't have people petition to get money from Putney, from the taxpayers. But there are issues that come up on warnings that, like charter changes, suggestions for a change in a charter, the Brattleboro issue of allowing, I think it's 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in local elections. Those are things that came up through a petition and were put on. So it isn't always money, and it could be a zoning change, or it could be something else that it isn't always about money and getting an appropriation. So, and I don't know how, it seems to me that we can't separate the issues. If it's an appropriation, it's going to be treated one way, and if it's not, it's going to be treated another way. I don't think we can do that. having the Putney Gun Club tax exempt, that isn't really an appropriation, but it's foregone revenue. So where does that fall? So I don't think we can separate it. I think we have to do it one way or the other. Susan?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really important to remember that our town meetings, at our town meetings, we weigh in on issues of finance, but also on issues of governance. And in particular this year, when a number of towns might be switching just for this year only from a floor meeting to Australian ballot because of COVID, that's not a year to allow major structural changes to be for towns to take those on when they're skipping the deliberative part of the structure. I mean, town meetings on issues of finance and governance really kind of act as a little legislature. So we are a direct democracy, but we're a direct deliberative democracy. And if we lift off the deliberative part of that, I think we risk winding up with collateral damage after COVID has come and gone. We might look back and say, "Oh my gosh, what did we do?" So I would. I'm usually, yay, gung ho, give towns the ability to do things. But I think that this is a time when we want to sort of hold the rudder steady.
So your suggestion is that we not include anything in here on either waiving petitions or allowing electronic petitions or signatures?
I mean, I would take those arguments into consideration when you're thinking about that.
Kelly?
Well, first I'll say I think it's really important to keep the signature requirement, but if the discussion about using electronic signatures is something that's going to hold this bill up, I would opt to not include that and leave that for a discussion for another day. But I think waiving the signature requirement, I would not be in favor of seeing that happen.
Scott?
Just one final comment. I know I've spoken a lot, but as you can tell, this is an important topic to me. I wonder, because this has come up in other jurisdictions, and of course, Vermont is Vermont. It's every state has its own constitution and laws, but I do wonder, it has been litigated in other states whether legislatures have the obligation. It's not just discretionary, but whether they have the obligation to do something in the context of COVID to accommodate the direct democracy process. So while waiving signatures may be far in the end of the spectrum and not advisable, I do wonder whether there's actually some, and I honestly don't know the answer, but I do wonder if there is a legal obligation to accommodate the petition process in the context of COVID.
So I'm going to ask Tucker and Betsy Ann a question. If the select board said, we understand that it means a wet ink signature, is that what you called it? But we're going to allow electronic petitions. Would they run afoul of anything, and who would challenge it? Because the people that wanted the petition on certainly wouldn't challenge, and the people who didn't agree with it would vote against it. So what would be the consequences if a town just decided to allow electronic signatures?
Can you all hear me with my fancy new microphone?
Yes.
Excellent. This is the canine annoyance mitigation device. She didn't like one. She didn't like one of your voices, so you all have to apologize for some past indiscretions in your former lives. Yeah. So the way that you framed the issue, my answer would be, I'm not sure. I think the more likely scenario that would come up if we're dreaming up complications is that municipality, the municipal clerk, does not accept a petition that is done by electronic signature and rejects that petition, and then the voters would challenge that decision for some reason, right? I think that's a scenario that you would see play out. I'm not sure outside of an action in court to try to remedy that or to enjoin the municipality from carrying on the election without that ballot item. I'm not sure what the remedy would be. And in your case, what would the ramification be for a municipality accepting electronic signatures? I think reading through the warning and notice content statute that the municipal clerk may be able to accept and deviate from state law, and that the enforcement would have to come from a challenge from some sort of government oversight of that. And I'm not sure who that would be, whether that would be you all or who would carry that out.
Okay, anything more on this, or where are we? Should we just leave this alone? And first of all, is anybody in favor of eliminating the necessity for petitions to be signed? I don't see anybody jumping up and down for joy.
So is your question is anyone in favor of waiving a signature requirement?
Yes.
Okay, no.
Okay.
I would not be either.
Okay. So now, does anybody want to put anything in here about allowing the flexibility for them to do electronic signatures, or just being silent on it and letting the town figure out if they want to do it or not? Where are we? Chris?
I'm just thinking it seems a little unhelpful to the towns to leave them in a legal sort of murky territory. Like, you could go ahead if you want. There might be repercussions. It could be challenged in another way. I don't know if there's, we could get into endless ifs. But I'm just wondering if it's not particularly helpful to the towns if we foresee a problem by remaining silent and don't try to offer some clarity if that's possible. Maybe we're not going to be able to come to an agreement, or we'll so bog down the bill that we risk our ambitious timeline, in which case I'd say remaining silent seems like an attractive solution for the moment. One other quick thought that came up was, if it's a 5% requirement, does it make any sense to consider a lower number?
No.
That,
Oh, I mean.
does that facilitate in any way? It's a splitting.
So what's 5% of the Pomfret voter? Well, how many signatures would you have to get in Pomfret?
Right now, with the 5% requirement, it's approximately 40 signatures, so it's not a huge hurdle.
Yeah.
If it were reduced to 2.5, it'd be 20, roughly 20 signatures. Yeah,
Allison?
So, I know the Secretary of State said their bandwidth was pretty full. Is it worth our doing some work on this and finding out what electronic signature formats have worked elsewhere, and meet again in a week and review that to either provide more confidence for people or I'm just trying to think, because I get the argument about the direct democracy. I understand that. I also understand the higgledy-piggledy aspect of each town doing it differently and some people being denied that. But and Scott, people could sign things at the library. The library is open, or at Artistry. I mean, you do have vehicles in Pomfret to have people go in and sign if they're directed to that, to go and sign it. So I do think if you
I'm sorry, Senator Clarkson, but also that requires a willingness. I mean, the library is one thing, but Artistry is a private organization, and they don't have to allow traffic in and out of their building, which is already, they're trying their best to protect the health of their customers, and to invite traffic on signatures is, you know, I don't know that they would want to do that.
Right.
Well, I don't think that was I don't want to get us into where you can do it and who can do it. I think that if we're going to require them, they're probably in every town are some places. In Putney, I think we need 60 signatures. I could get 60 signatures by just putting a clipboard at the co-op and not even standing there, just having people sign. So,
yeah. Anyway, if we want to explore further, if there is a standard format that other states have used, other municipalities that we can agree to in the next week or so, we could re-meet and address this issue again. But I think if we can't find that easily or quickly, that we should continue to require signatures and or have the select board make decisions. And I know it's imperfect, but have the select board make decisions about what they're going to do about it.
So you're suggesting just remaining silent, don't put anything in here about petitions at all?
Right. Unless we want to look at some options that towns could use and recommend them to towns. I mean,
but then they'd have to decide whether they're going to use that or use something else. And do we limit it to the ones that we're recommending? And that means the Secretary of State's office is the one that's really responsible for deciding which ones are appropriate and which ones aren't. I think that's a little messy given the time that we have.
Yeah, our time challenge is a serious one.
Okay, Scott?
Yeah, and I understand. I feel like perhaps the time challenge is what's really making this conversation difficult, because I would venture that if we were having this conversation 6 months ago, electronic signatures might be more well received. I would encourage the legislature to look at jurisdictions such as Massachusetts, Washington, California. They've solved this problem. There is I feel quite confident that there's language out there, that statutory language that could be borrowed, that might help get us there. That would, you know, not necessarily have to, it would allow for electronic signature, but it wouldn't necessarily create a ton of complexity. So I guess I would encourage this group to take a little bit of time, the time that's left, and do a little bit of homework and look at what some other jurisdictions have done and see if there's something that could be baked into the legislation that would make it palatable and not make it seem like such a heavy lift. I don't want folks to give up, in other words, is what I'm saying. Please don't give up on the electronic signature part of this just yet.
My concern here is the time. I think we are out of time. We have, we are now on December 4th, I think. And that means we have 2 weeks before Christmas. That means that Tucker and Betsy Ann have to have a bill completely drafted, approved by the sponsor. And I assume that probably Sarah and John or somebody are going to be the sponsors, approved by them, sent to the proofreaders, sent to the printers, get a number so that it's on January 2nd, it's there, or January 6th, is that it's on the desk for introduction. I don't think we have time to do anything more. I think that puts Tucker and Betsy Ann in a really, really awkward position, because they also have other bills that they're drafting right now. So I don't see how we can do anything. I think we have to come to a decision today. I might be wrong, But I think that we would be putting undue pressure on the Secretary of State's office and on Tucker and Betsy Ann to come up with some solutions to this by looking at other jurisdictions. Rob?
I have to agree with you, Senator White. When I take a look at the amount of discussion that it's generated today, I can just imagine what it's going to be like going forward here. So I would support that we stay silent. Each community does already, they have a process in place. They can all be a bit different, but I have confidence that they'll figure out and navigate it going forward. But I'll go back to just look at the amount of debate that it's caused today.
And that same debate would be held probably in committee and on the floor. And in addition to the fact that we need to have this bill introduced on the very first day that we're there. So that's the reality of the timing, I think. Does anybody disagree with that?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Betsy Ann.
I was just going to say logistically, at the earliest, I think that this bill would be introduced on Friday of the first week of session. I don't think the first day of session will have any bill introductions. It's more convening and organizing. And then the second day is the joint session. And so I think realistically, I'm inferring that bill introductions won't happen until the Friday, the first week. So that would be January 8th, just to put that on everyone's radar.
So Sarah, does that, you'll have your committees before then. So even if it isn't technically introduced, can you start looking at it?
I will certainly ask permission of the speaker to convene a meeting as soon as the committees have been assigned so that we can begin to get members familiar with the issues that are coming before us. When we put an official bill in front of them versus when we put ideas and language in front of them is sort of beside the point. It'll take a little bit of time for them to hear some of the testimony from the players in order to get comfortable that this is the solution. So I don't think it's a problem that we don't see it officially till Friday.
Okay.
I'm a little disappointed if we have a new House clerk that they couldn't expedite the process here, but.
I know, it's a shame. And here we wanted to be the talented and hardworking Government Operations Committee.
Oh, you
yet
are.
Another.
And you will be. I'm just saying.
Biennium.
Just customarily, I just don't think that there are any bill introductions on day 1 or 2.
Okay.
But of course, the committees can meet as whenever they want to, whenever they're appointed.
All right. So it looks like right now the decision is to not address this issue in this bill because it would bog it down. I don't see anybody jumping around. Okay. So are there other ideas? I know that Carrie, you had said is she still with us? I don't see her. Are there other, Karen?
Yeah, so one other issue that we had discussed with the Secretary of State's office is that we urge you to give Brattleboro, with its representative town meeting, authority to meet remotely again in 2021.
Yeah, and that I had been pushing for the ability of any town to decide whether they wanted to meet remotely. But I understand that would be as contentious as petition signing. So I'm not there, but Brattleboro, because they have it isn't everybody that gets to attend the town meeting. It's just the 150 representatives, and they know who they are. And they did a great job last year of educating everybody. My sister is a town rep, and making sure that people had the ability to sign in and log in, and they helped people figure it out. So is there any disagreement on that? Susan?
Yeah, I don't disagree. And I just want to add that it's definitely not for now. It's not for this bill, but in Middlesex, we allow people to participate remotely. It's not a mandate. It's obviously we have a floor meeting, but just as a select board member can call into a meeting, we allow people to participate we use a GoToMeeting, so a mix of sound and visual. And we've been doing it since 2008, and we've gotten lots of legal advice on this. And so far, so good. But I just wanted to offer that out as, if you discuss this in the future, I'd be glad to tell you sort of what discoveries we've made in terms of advice we've gotten legally, and also just how we do it.
I think we will put that on our list for, we're going to do a whole elections session on and we'll talk about municipal elections and meetings and stuff at the same time. So thank you. Does anybody have any issues with allowing Brattleboro to continue their remote town meeting, given the fact that they have specific people? Allison?
Yeah, of course, here we are at the end of our meeting time, and we're past our end of our meeting time. But it is, I guess, I don't know why I didn't think of this, but I mean, we are not in this bill we're giving towns flexibility about when they choose to meet, but we're not giving them flexibility to decide whether they would like to meet remotely or not.
I think that opens up a bigger can of worms than the petitions. And I think that it would bog down this bill so much that, I would love to go there, but I don't think we can this year. And as Susan said, they're already doing it. So maybe other towns can, if a town is out there that wants to figure out how to do it, they can call Susan and find out. And there's no prohibition against them doing it. So I think we should just be silent on that in this bill.
Okay, so when you say there's no prohibition, a town could decide to have people, if they had the core select board, socially distanced in the meeting, they could have a screen and have residents participate remotely.
I don't know. Susan said they've been doing it since 2008. Yeah. So clearly they can do it. And if a town wants to figure that out, they should call Middlesex and find out how to do it. But I think we can't go there in this bill.
Got it. Then I would encourage the VLCT to promote the Middlesex model and/or any other models where there is partial virtual participation in town meetings, because my guess is there'll be a number of people who would like to participate in town meetings that way.
Well, we'll leave that up to them.
Right. I'm just saying it out loud.
Yep. Susan?
Yeah, no, I just want to add that, up until now, we have had limited interest. And so the speed bumps, all of the work that we've done to make this happen has been with a big body in person and a small number of people coming in remotely. And I think under COVID, I can imagine that you might wind up with the reverse, which would involve it's a lot of technical work. And I don't think it's impossible. I know the AFL-CIO just had, a deliberative meeting of over 100 delegates. It works, you can do it. But what are the ramifications in terms of making sure that everybody's a voter and, there's lots of, and obviously there are access issues, but if you have a floor meeting that people can't attend, then you don't have those access issues. But I think between now and March, if you've never done it before, it's a heavy lift, I think, to get there. So I'm not sure the League of Cities and Towns is going to be like, yay, let's promote this model when it hasn't been tried by other towns.
Anybody else?
Well,
it's-
Senator White, I'll
Yes.
just be clear. Sorry, Karen, that
no, go ahead.
it's the very clear opinion from our office that that is not allowed under the current law, remote voting to take place for annual meeting. And I've talked to Susan, I know the Middlesex situation
Okay.
of democracy, right? But
I-
that's been our clear advice. So
I want to be aware of our time here, and we're not going to, this is not going to be in the bill, so I don't know that we need to discuss it because it's not going to be in the bill. So,
the other comment I was going to make, not on that, is unless I missed something, which I very well might have, I don't think there was any legislative action involved in allowing Brattleboro to do their meeting the way they did. I believe they were just confident with their city attorney under their charter that it was allowable and doable. But I wouldn't be opposed to you guys taking affirmative action saying they can do it that way. I don't know that it's needed.
okay, well, let's do it just in case.
You did specifically allow them to do it last time.
Okay. All right. Anything else? So the way I'm looking at this is what we've decided is that we're going to allow towns to change their meeting date. We're going to trust that we're going to allow municipalities to change their date. And it's already, school districts are already doing it on the same date. Every member of the district, that's a current. We are going to trust the towns and the municipalities to set their meeting date at a time when that allows them to meet all the state requirements for reporting and setting the school tax and everything. We're not going to tell them when they should do it. We're going to allow towns to mail out ballots if they choose. We will hope that there might be some money in the Budget Adjustment Act, but we can't guarantee it. We are going to allow the flexibility to the Secretary of State to do some operational and administrative things that might come up. We are going to be silent on petitions, signatures on petitions. We're going to be silent on remote. And we're going to make sure that the charters, the towns with charters are covered so that they won't lose their select boards or councilors during that period of time. Did I miss anything here? Oh. Okay, so Tucker and
May I just clarify something that Will said? Will, when you say you wouldn't be, your office wouldn't be opposed to figuring out everything, possibly virtual participation, as long as there was no vote involved, correct?
Ellison, we're not going to talk about remote meetings.
Okay. I just was curious.
First of all, we're over our time now, and I think that to be fair to people, we can have this conversation at another time, but we're not going to address remote meetings at all in this bill.
Got it.
We're going to do the thing, except for Brattleboro, to allow their town reps. And there's no other town that has a town rep system at this point, right? Even though we did pass a bill a number of years ago, Susan worked on that with us, allowing any town with over 5,000 voters to adopt a representative town meeting system. So, okay.
Madam Chair, this is
Yes.
Carol Dawes, Berry City. I would just want to recommend that you don't limit the charter reference to just the, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it's more than just that.
Yeah.
Our charter specifies when our town meeting is. Other charters have similar kind of limitations. And so having the charters opened up enough for all three of these steps would be advantageous.
Yeah, you're right. Thank you. And I'm sure Betsy Ann and Tucker caught that, even though I didn't say it. I'm sure that they were on top of that. So do we, if we're in agreement on these things, can we assume that our two committees at least will be supportive of this bill? Okay, because I think that's important, because we're going to have to start, yes, I see thumbs, yes, yay, I love thumbs. We're gonna have to start meeting with our colleagues to get them up to speed, I think, because we're not gonna have a lot of time to do this. So I'm suggesting that we meet with our various, however we do this with our caucuses or with our caucus of the whole or however, and start getting our colleagues up to speed on this. Chris?
I'm wondering if it'd be helpful, because this is pretty technical and has quite a few points as you walk through them all. That was very helpful to create some sort of one-pager summary, so that we all share the very same information and we have something handy to email to people and things like that.
Yep, that's a great idea. And I guess Sarah and Betsy Ann and Tucker and I can kind of try and put that together. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, so thank you so much. Sorry I was a little more dictatorial in this meeting than I like to be, but it seemed that there were a lot of people here and we had a lot of issues and a lot of opinions. So thank you for bearing with me. And oh, and Isabella, it's time for her to go out. Anybody have anything else they want to chime in on here? Thank you, everybody, for your input. I think this was a really good, it wasn't an official committee meeting, it was a think session. So thank you.